The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to week 4 of the Developmental Disabilities Institute webinar series on leadership and advocacy. So we're so happy today we have Ms. Jennifer Greening with us, and she's going to talk about building inclusive opportunities for students. But before we get started, I'd like to just say a few words. This is Elizabeth Jenks, and Michael Bray is here helping and assisting us with the technical aspects of the webinar today, so we welcome all of you. We've had a wonderful turnout through the first 3 weeks, and we're very happy about that. Just a couple of words. The homework looked really good last week. You all did a pretty nice job of taking the concepts of self-determination and applying them to your own lives and giving, very good examples of how freedom, support, authority, confirmation, etc. Were implemented in your own life. So thank you for your thought-provoking work on that. Just a little quick word, though, for next week, and Mrs. Greening is going to have an assignment. If you could do me a big favor, since I'm grading the homework, and it's pass-fail, it's not, you're not getting a grade, don't panic here, anybody, but please type out your assignments. If you could do that for me, I'd really appreciate it. If you can't, what I'd like for you to do is print neatly for me. A couple of people had their handwriting was just a little difficult to kind of decipher some of it. So preferably type, but if you can't, you can certainly print your answers neatly, okay, with black or dark blue pen. All right, thank you. And I would like to say that next week we'll be doing week 5, and that will be Julia Hernandez and myself. And we're going to be covering cultural competency and disability next week and engaging Hispanic families. So that will be next week's webinar series. Today we are very fortunate to have Mrs. Jennifer Greening with us today. She is the author of Opening Doors and Opening Lives, Creating Awareness of Advocacy, Inclusion, and Education for Our Children with Special Needs. You may recall I gave you some information about how to purchase the book last week, and I think she's going to offer you that information again this week. But I'd like to share some information about what I know about Jennifer. I've known her for probably 4 or 5 years now. She came to DDI. She was one of our authors in our authors series and talked about her book. She's been a public educator for 24 years. She's currently a reading teacher and writing intervention teacher. She has been a board member of the ARC of Northwest Wayne County. She was their 2010 Member of the Year. Her book is sold nationally. It's been reviewed favorably by many key organizations, including the Autism Society of Michigan, who is recommended for usage for their parents who want to have inclusive opportunities for their students. The book, I would highly recommend it. It's got some very simple, straightforward strategies and ways to include children from every aspect, from being a teacher, from being parents. I mean, it's really about collaboration and teamwork and the benefits of inclusion. Jennifer's also a parent. She's a parent of a young woman with some challenges. So she's not only done this professionally, but she's lived this in her personal life as well. And I'd like, without further ado, to introduce Ms. Greening to you.
One last thing, as always, if you have questions, please type them into the box to the right, and we will address those throughout the course of the webinar. And like all the previous 3 webinars, this one also will be archived on the webinar page. You can access that starting most likely this evening.
Okay, good morning. I am Jennifer Greening, the author of Opening Doors, Opening Lives, Creating Awareness of Advocacy, Inclusion, and Education for Our Children with Special Needs. I want to thank Elizabeth Jenks and Michael Bray for having me here today at the Developmental Disabilities Institute at Wayne State University. It is an instrumental resource for our community and nationwide in giving persons with special needs and disabilities access to typical lives and I appreciate their voice. So today I'm going to give you an overview of inclusive education for children with special needs. I have been a public school teacher for 24 years, and what I have found is that there isn't a general understanding of where kids with significant disabilities go to school. And I want to share my story with you so that you'll have an understanding of how the process works, and that you'll be braver in encouraging families to think about what they want for their child with special needs. And I wrote the book because I was trying to have our own daughter receive a great education. And what I found was there wasn't really directions on how to do it, how to be included. I did know some kids were included that had significant disabilities, some kids weren't, and I just didn't understand how it worked. So for our beginning, when my daughter was born, she's the oldest of our 3 children. She is currently 16 years old, and she is in the 10th grade at our local high school. When she was born, as many children, we didn't understand immediately that she had significant disabilities or special needs. What I learned is, as
many families, the notion that your child has a disability or extra learning needs unfolds. And so it's not so clear. When she was little, 16 years ago, they were not diagnosing girls with autism, and there wasn't. Now the parents go in and there's checklists and there's quite an awareness of autism, but when she was little, we didn't have that. And what we were told was she'll catch up, over time, or, it's hard to know how many gains she'll make as she learns and grows. So she was our first, and like many parents, I hadn't known anyone with a disability before our daughter was born. I had been teaching 7 years, and I had graduated from Michigan State University. I thought I was well educated. And I had, in my profession, been very dedicated in doing extra training, and I was highly, highly motivated to make a difference for kids. I attended inquiry science training in Boston, Massachusetts on my own with a group of teachers, just because we wanted to learn how to do a better job of teaching science. I was on the school district's writing curriculum committee, and I was going school to school with my colleagues, teaching other teachers about the writing process. I always laugh. I say, parents requested to have their kids in my class, and that was the proof that I was awesome. So what I didn't understand is, or even thought about, was where are the kids with disabilities? It didn't even enter my radar. When I was hired into school, I was an upper elementary school teacher. I was a 4th and 5th grade teacher, and I had no understanding that kids were being separated at a young age and weren't even coming to my school. So it wasn't until I had my own daughter and kind of lived our story that I understood that that life wasn't going to unfold the way I thought. So as I encountered people with questions, I expected, I guess, more of a clear direction on what was going to happen for our daughter. In the story, her name is Marissa. The point of writing the book was to share my story, and I'm confident that one day she'll share her story. But for now, she is in the 10th grade at 16 years old, and she is nonverbal. Okay.
Sorry, everybody. I know some of you are saying you're seeing black screen. There's an issue with the format, so I can see it now. So please keep letting me know if you're having issues with that. We're seeing the black screen when it goes full.
Okay.
So you're just gonna have to scroll through it. That's
okay. So my understanding is my presentation isn't going to look as fancy as I had hoped, but you're going to get the.
It looks good.
It still looks good, so I'm glad about that. So the purpose of the book is to teach people how the process of including a child with significant disabilities works. And what I would like to encourage you to do as I talk this morning, and I'm with you until 11:30, is to ask questions, is to, if there's things you wonder about, processes you're not sure about, please, I think they can type in questions. So type your questions in. I can't imagine there hasn't been anything I haven't been asked or challenged about. And, I think that's a good way to bring about understanding about topics. So please, don't be afraid to ask questions, and I'm happy to answer anything you're curious about. So people ask me, what's wrong with Courtney? And as I was starting to say, her name in the book is Marissa, but I always laugh when I talk, and I talk for our university classes, and I'm a guest speaker and for advocacy groups. And I always say, well, now that we're friends, now that you've met me electronically here, her name is Courtney. It's really hard to talk about her and give her a fictitious name. But the point of the book was not to share exactly Courtney's story, but my story as her mother, and how I needed to use my expertise as a public school teacher. I am a general education teacher, and I like it that way because I want to have a voice for children that this is not a special education issue. It's really creating good schools for all of our kids. And the resources I need for my daughter benefit everybody. So I am scrolling down here. Okay, so let me get to the next screen. All right, so okay. So when they see the presentation, are they seeing
In the sidebar then?
Okay, that's fine. All right, well, it's kind of good. You can kind of see the preview as you go along. So in this slide is Oscar Pistorius. And unfortunately, he's been in the news for not such great reasons lately. But this photograph was from when he was in the Olympics. And what's amazing to me is that as an Olympian, there was a lot of controversy about his participation in the General Olympics, not Special Olympics. He was in the General Olympics, and he was called the Blade Runner because he is a double amputee. And before he was even a year old, his legs were amputated from the knee down. And as you can see there, he's fitted with the artificial limbs. And my experience with people when my daughter was young was we didn't know what was wrong, and people often would, they'll say, well, what's wrong with her? What's wrong with your daughter? And I'm like, well, nothing's wrong with her. She's perfect. She's my daughter. I think she's fantastic. But I think what people want to know is, what is her disability? So at 16 years old, my daughter is nonverbal, and in school, she has been given the label of significantly multiply impaired and the label of autism. So I suppose if you had to have the most significant labels, my daughter has got them. And when she was little, I remember we asked for her to be evaluated for autism. And one of the social workers that talked to me in the hallway said, Mrs. Greening, it's not going to be such a bad thing if she's not diagnosed with autism, because that's a lifelong disability and you really don't want that diagnosis. And what I find is it's usually the conversations outside of the meetings that can really influence how a family feels supported or not supported. So I would encourage this audience that I understand is made up of mostly social workers to be a true source of support to families and to be careful with how you help families view their children. So I imagine here Oscar Pistorius' mother, when he was a little baby, learning that he had to have his legs amputated. And I wondered about the social worker that might be in the room with her as she learned the news. And I wonder what that person would have said if she would have shared her dream for her little boy and said, I dream that someday my son will be in the Olympics. You know, who would have thought that he would have all that potential? So, you know, the point is as a young child, we don't know the potential of our children. And what happens with me is when I share my hopes and dreams for my daughter, people may frame it as I'm being unrealistic. Well, I believe that she has endless potential and great possibilities. So I'm not going to be the one to close any doors for her. I'm not going to be the one to send her to a separate school and limit the amount of access she has to curriculum and conversation. So what you need to think about is, what are your hopes and dreams for this little baby as an adult? And it is that driving vision of my daughter as an adult that kept her in school, that kept her amongst people that talk, because I'm not going to live forever, and she has to learn to live without me. And this
grow up in spite of what I do and live without me. But my daughter, I've had to work to make her independent of me, because she's at a great risk for people wanting to protect her and shelter her, and that doesn't teach her to be independent of me. So I need to have a clear vision of her as an adult. And the national advocacy groups that help us have a clear vision. So if you don't know about organizations, such as this one, the Developmental Disabilities Institute, or the ARC, a national advocacy group for persons with disabilities, or TASH, that focuses on the civil rights of persons with disabilities. These resources are in the back of my book, and were guiding us as we learned about our daughter. And it's bigger than just me and my daughter, that there are national groups supporting our vision of an equal, unlimited life for our daughter as an adult. And even the United Nations has made guidelines for the inclusive lives of persons with disabilities. So if you know that you want this child to function independently as an adult, then you need to help them do that as a very young child. And so what I found was, when she was little, people wanted to use old structures to support our daughter. So 100 years ago, people with significant disabilities were kept home on the farm. They didn't go to school. And then 50 years ago, people were progressive, and these families decided their children with disabilities needed schools. So it was very progressive to build separate schools to educate people with disabilities. However, the notion that a separate but equal education would work didn't work for people with disabilities, just like it doesn't work for anybody, because there's unnatural learning situations that happen. So that didn't work. So in history, 25 years ago, people started building separate classrooms within general education schools to educate people with disabilities. And they grouped people according to disabilities. So you might have a room for people with cognitive impairments, they call it the CI room, or a room for people with autism, they call it the AI room, or emotional impairments, the EI room. So we had these rooms within schools, and then they were finding that those kids were just educated down the hall
and that wasn't working either. And so what current research supports is just like we've learned as general ed teachers, that the best education for kids is amongst their typical peers. So unfortunately, we still have those old schools operating and those old notions that the children are safer in a separate facility, and it doesn't give them access to a typical life and typical, curriculum. And so when I started, I wanted my daughter, I was very focused on helping her develop language. She didn't talk, she was nonverbal. She couldn't walk, she couldn't stand up, she had low muscle tone. So her watching the diagnosis happen was an interesting process because there were checklists. So the physical therapist did her checklist, and they said, can she stand up on her own? No, she can't stand up on her own. Can she, the speech therapist had her checklist, can she speak? Can she say mama, dada? No, she can't speak. The occupational therapist, can Courtney stack blocks? No, she can't stack blocks. Well, there's no proof then that Courtney knows anything, so she's got significant multiple impairments. And it was interesting when we went to the neurologist when she started having seizures. He quizzed us, how do you know? How does the school district decide what her label is? And I explained there were checklists, and he said, well, according to her brain scans, there's no brain damage. How can they be sure she has cognitive impairments? And what I had to explain was the label, as much as I don't like labeling, label gives you access to service. So when I started, I was very, very reluctant to have my daughter labeled at all. She was given the most significant label, but that gave her access to service. So what we were told is if we were good parents, since she had multiple impairments, that we would put her in the place where she could, quote, get the most help, which they meant the most specialized help. So what I did not understand, and what many people in our community do not understand, is that these children are put on buses and sent to schools outside of their school districts. They have relationships with county schools, so that our daughter was going to be sent to either the school for children with autism or the school for children with cognitive impairments. And we were told, Mr. and Mrs. Greening, you need to pick which school you want her sent to. Being included in our neighborhood school for kindergarten wasn't even on the table. See, the law says that you have to provide an education from the least restrictive environment to the most restrictive environment from the school district's perspective. Now, to me, that seems kind of sad. I don't know why you'd want to put anyone in the most restrictive environment when you're looking at it from the point of view as my little girl. But I didn't understand that even having her stay included was a possibility. So we went and looked at the schools, and remember 16 years ago, students with autism were mostly diagnosed, they were boys, mostly boys. And we thought our daughter was autistic from a very young age, and we asked for an autistic evaluation from the school district. And when the people came to look at her, she was in a stroller because she couldn't walk, and there were two women from the school that came over. And in our conversations, they said, we're not going to do much of an evaluation for the autism because according to our expertise, she's much too smiley and interactive to be autistic. So we don't think that's an appropriate label for her. So at this point, we were doing a lot of things and therapies based on recommendations from the Autism Society of America. But what we had to decide was, did we want to fight that label and have her sent to the school for kids with autism that was mostly boys, or did we want to go ahead with the cognitively impaired, multiply impaired label alone and have her go to the school for kids with cognitive impairments? So we went ahead and we didn't fight the label because kids often can receive more than one label, and it didn't really matter. At that point, it didn't make any sense for her to go to school with all boys as a little girl. So she started school in the next county. She had braces on her legs, and we put her on the bus, and off to school she went. And that was my first understanding that as a parent of a child with special needs, no longer was I the boss of what was going to go on for my daughter. Everything was by committee now. So she was being sent to the school in the next county. I was told that they expected her to ride the bus to and from school. And when I said, you know, she's only 5 years old, I really don't feel comfortable having her ride the bus, 20 to 30 minutes a day without me. She's nonverbal. She doesn't walk. At that meeting, they said to me, oh, you're one of those mothers. Okay, then we'll compromise. How about this? You can bring her to school, but she will ride the bus home. So it was the first opportunity I had to experience that notion that I wasn't clearly in charge of what I wanted for her by myself. And it was the first time I was ever called the mother, which I've been called a lot of times. I never knew it could sound like a swear word. But it's just how you get treated when you don't agree with the general committee of what you want for your child. What I didn't understand as clearly as I understand today is that I was focused on developing language and peer interactions. And when I went to that school to drop off my daughter, as I said, I was a teacher for 7 years. I had never seen a school just for kids with disabilities. And I was shocked by what I saw. It wasn't my vision for my daughter. And as you coach parents to talk about their child, I learned quickly that I couldn't change a whole system. I'm one mother. I am very educated, but I am not able to. My husband always says, Jen, save Courtney for save the world second. I can't speak for the rest of the world. I can tell people my understandings of laws and what has happened. There are special education attorneys that can help families that have helped us. There are advocates, educational advocates that can come with you to meetings, and good advocates work in the spirit of cooperation. But what I have found the most powerful thing to stay focused on is the need of my daughter. So in the next slide, here are pictures of her. What I realized is that not only does she have access to school, but she has access to a whole life. So we are naturally in a place where as opportunities arise for kids her age, she is naturally included. So
up at the top, this was the Girls on the Run program from the YMCA when she was in the 6th grade. This is Courtney and I in the Girls on the Run program offered through the school district. The problem with the Girls on the Run program is that it's sponsored by the YMCA, and Courtney requires pair activities she participates in. But because it was not offered through the school district, they would not give us paraprofessional help. And the company like this, well, it's all girls from her school that are participating. It takes place at the school, but it's hosted by an outside organization. Support would not be given. What I learned, and as Courtney's mother, a lot when she was very young, a lot looked at me as a young child because there were a lot of mothers there when she was little. But as she got older, it wouldn't look normal and natural for her attending things with her. She needs to learn to live without me. So what I learned was that the YMCA believes that people of all abilities be in their programs, and they gave us a volunteer to run with Courtney. So as the
the person with significant disabilities involved in sports is the same purpose as everybody, is to reach your potential, is to change, is to hear the belief that you got to work hard. And so Courtney could walk probably walk about a half a mile with support, and she learned to stand. She was 5 years old. So when she started, at the school in the next county, she could not stand independently. We've been working on that since she was young. What they told us, the education for Courtney, was that if we were good parents, again, we would send her to the school where, quote, all the help was. We did private physical therapy, and we did the school therapy and years of therapy, and we did speech therapy. And was that when a person has significant disabilities, there may not be any amount of therapy that's going to make them not disabled. Having disabilities is a normal condition of being a human being. And it doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It just means you have disabilities in your way, and it's a natural thing to be different. Everyone's different and has their own needs. So continue to send our daughter to the school in the next county, or we can kind of come to terms with, she has disabilities and we need to include her in life. And we spent a lot of years talking about how she needed help and how she needed therapy. And I never said until she was in about the 3rd grade. And I wish I would have had that notion earlier, because I tend to understand that notion more clearly than she has special needs, or please include her to be nice, or please include her in the instruction. But people seem to understand the notion of access for people with disabilities. So I wish I would have been braver to own that for her. Not that she has to see herself as a person with disabilities, but that she has rights, and to have access to regular school. So what I learned was, at the school for kids, and of course I love all kids. It wasn't that I didn't want her with kids with disabilities. I just don't want her with only kids with disabilities. I need her in a typical ratio of, in a population, there's a typical ratio of people with disabilities to people. And when I went to observe her in the school for kids with disabilities, I had been teaching. I expected school the way I knew it. And so I made an appointment to observe her class. I wanted to know what was going on. She's a pretty sad little girl. She wasn't happy about going to school. They were saying that she was misbehaving. She wasn't keeping her shoes on in class, and I needed to kind of what was going on. And what I learned is anytime there's a discrepancy between the girl I see at home and a girl I see and what they report, and I needed to kind of learn to rely on that notion of, I'm not really sure what it is, but I need to trust that something's not right. To observe the class, and what I saw was Courtney seatbelted in a chair. It was like wooden chair because it was an old school. And the notion, I thought she was going to have like the best of the best, because I thought it was highly specialized. We'll talk about the schools for, just kids with disabilities. And so when I went to observe, Courtney was seated at the table, and there were like table all seatbelted in as well. And the teacher had a fuzzy dancing animal, and she started the animal at the head of the table. toward the back of the line of kids in the circle. And she would make the animal talk, and then she would put it in first person, and then they would push the animal, and they would make the animal talk, and the animal was going around the table. So I said to the teacher, I leaned in, and what's the objective of this lesson? I'm sure she loved that. And she looked at me and she said, well, I'm teaching them turn-taking skills. And I thought, if my daughter wants to learn turn-taking skills, I'll put her next to her two brothers that will take that animal right away, learn some turn-taking skills pretty quick. It wasn't that the teacher wasn't trying to do the right thing. At that developmental age, taking turns is an important skill. The problem was she was trying to teach it in an unnatural environment where the kids could not take that toy away, and they were all seatbelted in. That wasn't the place where she could learn to wait or learn to take turns. It just wasn't a natural place to learn that skill. The other thing is the way that behaviors were dealt with, and the way people talked to Courtney was not because they were mean people, or it's just the nature of being in a separate environment. Courtney hates to wear shoes, and she was kicking her shoes off, and I knew that. But as I said, she took the bus home every day. I noticed little pieces of tape on her shoes, and I didn't think much of it. I thought, well, that's kind of strange. And then one day, and the bus driver, I had to go, kind of get on the bus and take her off of the bus. And the bus driver said to me, what's up with her shoes? And I said, what do you mean? And I looked down, and her shoes were completely duct taped to her feet. And illegal, you cannot duct tape shoes to kids' feet. I brought her inside, and of course the first feeling I had was complete guilt, because it was clear to me that had been happening because she had tape on her shoes for a few days, little pieces of it. So I called the school, and I said, I need to speak to Courtney's teacher. And she got on the phone, and I said, I just got my daughter off the bus, and you won't believe this, her shoes. And on the other end of the phone, I guess I expected the teacher to be as horrified as I was. As a teacher, I wouldn't do that. I think it was allowed. The teacher flatly said to me, yeah, she's been taking her shoes off in class, so we taped them on her feet. She would. So my point of contention at that moment was not going to be to make a big deal that she broke the law and taped shoes. It was my clear understanding was I wanted Courtney in a place that if your shoes were taped to your feet, it would look highly unusual, be in a general education elementary setting. So we had a meeting. That's what happens. There's lots of meetings at school. And that happens after. And I had to write a letter explaining what had happened, and that, I expected people working with my positive behavioral supports, and that is not an acceptable way to interact with any human being, let alone if you have training. But at the meeting, Courtney was in the hallway, and she had been walking by as we were going into our meeting, and they said it was time for Courtney to have her speech therapy at that school. I said hi to her, and as I saw her go down the hallway, she was with a nice speech teacher. All his credentials were fantastic, and he was very nice to us. But as I watched her walk down the hallway, how would I know if Courtney was safe? How would I know if she was being abused? How would I know if something happened in this facility
because nobody talked. She was grouped among other kids that were nonverbal. And the research says that children that are nonverbal are at a very, very high rate of abuse. And unfortunately, many teachers were about how I felt people were inherently good. And unfortunately, I have learned that as a person, I had not experienced discrimination, and I did not understand the randomness of it. And it is very possible that there are people that are not with Courtney's best interest. And if nothing else, my responsibility as her mother is to keep her safe. And what happens is, as I go to talk nationwide, is that parents will say to me things like, I can camera shoes. They've tried to hide cameras under wheelchairs because they had a notion that something wasn't right. You're not going to be able to catch all the camera on the wheelchair, but you can have a better sense of what is going on, keeping children with, significant disabilities amongst people that talk. There was, unfortunately, when she was a little bit older, there was a paraprofessional assigned to her that we believed was being unkind, home with bruises that were unexplained. And what I learned, at that point, she was in a regular element that she wouldn't ever have anything bad happen to her, but that the natural supports that I had people in that school were calling me. The kids were telling us, that paraprofessional is mean. She's not nice to Courtney. Courtney's trying to get away. So the commotion that happened around Courtney when things were not right kept her safe and allowed me to be a better mother to her. So, it's actually kind of opposite than what people think. They're sending kids away to be safe, but really it's our kids that will help keep our children safe. I've met mothers that have said, well, my child's going to be bullied at school. Well, you know what? It's possible. We're going to have to help her learn to deal with this, and we're not going to hide her from the community. We're going to teach the community and her classmates to value people with disabilities that aren't going to be nice. I'm going to learn how to be a better advocate for her and how to train people around her to watch out for things like that. So as she grows into adulthood, we learn to identify people that aren't being kind or have targeted her simply based on her disability. So when she was young, I decided I did not want her in a school for kids only with disabilities, and Courtney back to our neighborhood school for kindergarten. And it's not based on anything Courtney had to prove. No child that has to prove what they know before they start kindergarten, unless you have a disability. Then they're all over, maybe you should go somewhere else. However, the parents that want their children included, those kids are there because the parents have decided that's where they want their kids to go. I always felt, they said the rule was before she could go into the 4-year-old room, she had to be potty trained. And, the notion that you have to have before you can go on to live a life amongst typical people is ridiculous, because there are adults that never can be because they have disabilities, and that's why there's depends. And, you have to, learn, people have to learn that sometimes not everyone can taught to do things. If you have a disability, if you have low muscle tone, if there's an issue, I wish I would have been a better voice for her, allow things to happen exceptionally for her, because the law says that you can live in this world as a person with disability, have exceptions made for you. So now they're going to see the test, kind of you know, the screen that we're going with. Sorry about that, but this is Courtney. This homecoming picture. You know, there isn't an event that happens in her life that I'm not very grateful and mindful that if she's in an inclusive setting in high school, she would miss homecoming. How can you miss homecoming? It's just part of being a child. And so the decisions we made young child to keep her included have given her access to a real life and friends and real experiences. When you talk about people with special needs, it's very important that we teach people in our community the correctness of how to talk about kids with disabilities. You know, it's a child with special needs, not a special needs child. And even sometimes parents will say, the autistic kid. Well, my experience is if you start a conversation at school in that way, then that's what people hear first. And what you want is the humanness first. My daughter is a person first, and she by the way has special needs. So the most politically correct way to address a disability is always to refrain to the child first. A child with special needs or a child with autism, not the special needs child. So, Mike, are there any questions that have come up? Does anyone have any questions as we go along?
No, just a lot of good comments. Agreeing with you.
I like it when people agree with me.
Ava did mention, she said that I would love to research resources for best education. Is not separate than trying to find that resource. So.
Oh, that's funny. So someone said they want to find the research for the best education. She can't find it. Yes, exactly. I tried to find that too. I went back to school after Courtney, after she was actually literally in the school in the next county, and I was in the university classes. I had had a master's degree already. I was working on my specialist degree, trying to figure this out and taking special education law classes and like, how does this work? And so I actually went up to one of my professors and I said to him, I'm looking for the research on teaching a nonverbal child how to read. and I really I hadn't come to terms with telling people my daughter had disabilities. It was close to my heart. I didn't talk about it very, hoping that she'd maybe just snap out of it. But in the meantime, everyone else seemed really focused on her behaviors, and I wanted to educate her. So it was after class, and there was a lot of other students around in the classroom, and so I asked my professor this question. I'm looking for the research to teach a nonverbal child how to read, and really loud, he took a step back from me and he said, "You can't find the reading research?" And I said, well, no, I can find the reading research, but see, my daughter has special needs and I want to teach her to read. And he cut me off. He said, "Did you find the reading research?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Then you found it." So what he was saying is, Courtney is a human being first. We know as teachers, and I have a slide coming up, that we do not ability group kids, that we know best practices for children to learn language is to be around a rich environment of singing and talking. And yet, when you say a child has a disabilities, you want to separate them from all of that research. The research is the research. This is how you teach people to read. This is how you teach people to write. This is how you teach people to talk. And it applies to all humans. It doesn't say, well, you have disabilities, you're different. And actually what I have had a lot of experience with is when I go and talk, it's funny because it seems to be after me at these conferences. I'll have my books and I'm there to sign my books and to speak. And more than once I've had a dad come up to me and they kind of look and say, "Are you telling me your daughter doesn't talk? How old is she?" And, I'll tell them how old she is, and they say, "Hey, my daughter was 32 years old when she started to talk. Don't you ever give up." And this other dad, again, they're kind of aggressive, "My daughter was 27 when she learned to talk. Don't you ever give up." I met a man at the TASH conference in Colorado, and I was there with my books, and the man pulled around in his motorized wheelchair, and he didn't talk, and he was staring at the ceiling, and there was a computer screen on his wheelchair. And I said, "Hi, I'm Jennifer Greening. I'm here to, educate people about educational opportunities for people with disabilities." And after a few minutes, he didn't talk back. He didn't really do anything. And then with one hand, he just started touching his computer screen. And out of the computer, it said, "Hi, I'm Bob. I'm also here to present for TASH. And I am with the Social Security Commission." And doing that, the notion that he was very intelligent at a young age and couldn't communicate. See, these children are smart. These children just can't communicate. And the notion, and it's in my book, but the notion that you presume competency, you have to move forward with the least dangerous assumption. So, for example, my daughter, there are people that will say you cannot prove what she knows, and that is the hardest part about being in school, because it seems to be all these obstacles. Well, in order to go to the next grade, what can you prove that you know? But see, we want her to have access to the content, access to the questions at grade level, and access to the lessons. And so you're not going to be able to prove it. But what happens is these children often, maybe if they don't learn to use words, they might learn to type, or they learn to write. And what the children tell us is that they could read very young, and they could understand very young, and that they just didn't have a point of access to the conversation, and they couldn't prove what they knew. So my daughter currently is in the 10th grade, and she is in classes affiliated with the National Honor Society. And the whole issue of grading, as you get older, that's a big deal. And so she's going through school with G grades in our district. And what that means is she's in class. We do all the homework with her. And the notion that the parents would be writing out her assignments with her or typing them with her, and that she's participating to the greatest capacity of listening and being there. And I found out my husband has a gift for reading Shakespeare. He can pronounce all the words. It's kind of strange. But, that we do these things with her to move forward. Because what I found was in the 3rd grade, when we did get the diagnosis from the University of Michigan Hospital for her, that indeed she did have autism, that label gave meaning to the idea that she can be a very intelligent person and not be able to communicate. You can look like you have great disabilities and still be very smart. So if you believe that children can read and learn and yet not be able to prove it, then why would you separate them? That's just kind of an old-fashioned notion. And I had a speech teacher that said to me that her proof that Courtney didn't know things was that she wasn't talking and that she wasn't doing it. And that's not right. So what you would say is, so for example, Courtney's in geometry with trig. Well, what is Courtney getting out of geometry with trig? Would be the devil's advocate way of challenging me. Well, what is anyone getting out of geometry with trig? She's there, she's in the class, she's with kids her own age, she's with very competent kids, not in the low-level classes, but among people that use complicated language and ask good questions, because she can't talk, she's nonverbal. So we need to explain everything to her and let her be in an environment where people ask questions. So let's say you said, well, she doesn't know anything to be in that class. Well, I'll tell you what then. She's learning X and Y, some letters. She's learning 5, 10, lots of numbers. But I'll tell you what, I'm pretty sure she learns the whole thing. It's funny, if you watch her, we read, one year we read in her literature class, A Christmas Carol by Dickens. And you know, we had to read 3 chapters that night, and, you know, she's sitting next to me on the couch, and I'm reading, probably not in my best teacher voice, you know, trying to get through the lesson. And she laughed at one of the paragraphs, and I stopped and I reread it, and she was right. It was funny, and she had caught it. And so I get glimpses, and parents get glimpses of their child. And, you know, my notion is if she can laugh at every joke on SpongeBob, that she's probably getting algebra and geometry just fine. But the notion I can't prove it, you know, and even, you know, our vision for her to go, you know, to community college, you know, we met with them, and the G grades will transfer just fine. She can audit classes, you know, and to stay amongst people her own age. You know, my dream for her is to have a life, a typical life based on her interests, based on other kids that she likes. You know, I did worry. I worried that people would tease her, that people wouldn't be kind. You know, and Courtney's a really nice girl, and I noticed that she attracts really good-hearted people, and that hasn't changed. And yeah, you're going to meet some mean people along the way, but you know, that's kind of the nature of people. So, oh, another question.
Tammy wanted to know, you mentioned reluctance to identify your daughter as a person with a disability. Do you support child with disabilities, meaning a shift in using that language in schools instead of special needs?
Oh, do I support a shift in saying a child with disabilities versus a child with special needs? You know, you're going to be in IEP teams, and I would encourage you to just really talk about the child. You know, I guess if you need to be heard, if you're having trouble being heard, I would hit harder with this person has a disability, and we're not going to exclude them. You know, later in the presentation, there's slides of Courtney being in Washington, D.C., and when you go there and you tour and you think about civil liberties and civil rights of people, no one gets excluded anymore, you know, and really it's sad to think that this seems to be the only group of people that is legally separated in our school system. And they're the people that don't often have a voice to say, I don't like what's going on at school. And what happened with Courtney is that she was mistreated or not included or not valued, or that things were confusing to her, and that behaviors that go with it. You know, when she transitioned to regular school, if you want to make a teacher crazy, have your kid take their shoes off 100 times in class. It seems to be something that's a real trigger for people. And she was taking her shoes off, and they were putting her shoes back on. And sensory-wise, that's hard for her. But what we agreed on is that she should wear shoes because we do live in Michigan and it's cold here. But we were called to have to come pick up Courtney one day because she wouldn't leave her shoes on. And you know, I had been scared to admit that she had disabilities. I had been scared if I said, I don't know how to get her to wear shoes, that she wouldn't be allowed to be in first grade or kindergarten. And so we were trying to fix the problem at home. I bought about 100 different pairs of shoes, and hopefully my husband won't listen to the webinar, because one of them were like an Australian $100 pair of shoes, and they were soft, and I've tried slippers and all kinds of shoes. And we actually worked with a behaviorist, probably about a year too long though, because we overemphasized behavior. You know, we need to stay focused on these children as being human beings, that you can't treat them for behaviors, because you're going to get more behaviors. But basically what we decided was Courtney needed to wear high top tennis shoes to school to figure out, you know, that those were shoes she could leave on. But that when we were called though to the school, before we figured out how to fix it, I was called and they said, Mrs. Greening, you need to come to school to get Courtney. She's not wearing shoes. And I immediately called our advocate at the ARC. And I said, I don't know what to do. They just called me to come get Courtney at school. She's not wearing shoes, and I can't fix it. I don't know how to do this. And our advocate, the nice thing about having an advocate, when it's your own child, it's hard to be reasonable, and you just get scared. And an advocate can help you feel focused and help you along, you know, with things and come to meetings. And she said, go to school. She said, don't go pick her up. Go to the board office and request to see the policy that says that children need to wear shoes at school. And she said, there's probably not a policy, but there's probably something related, like safety or something like that. But if there is a policy, we can write an IEP goal. The individualized educational plan for our daughter has specialized goals that she needs to achieve. And if she's struggling, the answer to the struggle is never, ever to move her. The answer is never to change her placement. The answer is always to increase support. Always, always, always. We're not going to move her from our home. You don't get to move people away. You need to figure out how to help her where she's at. I went to the school district. I went in and I said, hi, this is Mrs. Greening. I was just called to pick my daughter up from the elementary school, and I understand she's not wearing shoes, and I've been asked by my advocate to come and find the policy so we can write an IEP goal for wearing shoes. And within 5 minutes, I was whisked into an office with the director, and I was on the phone with a conversation with the principal of the school, and who didn't even know we had been called to come get our daughter. And they agreed that we didn't need an IEP goal written, that we could work through this, and that she could remain in school. And so what I learned was it's okay to agree there's a problem. I agree. Yep, there's something going on. However, what you need to expect is a solution to the problem. And the solution can be highly creative. You can use that whole school to help you, but the answer is never to go somewhere else. Because if you have the notion that child's going to go somewhere else, it really puts a damper on people's creativity. And you really feel like that you don't belong. So we really need to get away from the idea that these children are going somewhere else. There really isn't anywhere else they belong. You learn to be in school by being in school. And what we learned is the more she was included and the less people were, we kept people on her team that believed in her and that were creative and that were willing to work with us, the happier Courtney became. And the less unusual she was treated and her behaviors diminished. So unfortunately, people misread behavior and use it as a source to remove children from school instead of keeping them there where they belong. So the vocabulary along this is, if you get a group of educators together, they'll kind of argue about what's the best term, inclusion or mainstreaming. Basically, don't be afraid to ask questions and ask for things to be clearly stated. As we've worked through the issues of disabilities and seizures and autism, and kids come to school naturally with many, many needs. If you look in any school office, there's medicine for attention deficit and for diabetes. And, my daughter came with instructions with an IEP plan, and I was very shocked that people said, well, I don't know what to do. Well, I don't know what to do either. No one's an expert. The people that kind of have the most trouble with Courtney are the people that pretend to be, the experts in everything. That's the nature of having a disability. You have to be the expert in the child. So, we've met fantastic people, very, very well-educated people as we've gotten help for her. She sees a genetic neurologist that is curious about her. We went out to California and met with a doctor whose people in his practice won the Nobel Peace Prize for immunology work. And what I found is the more educated people are, the more willing they are to say, well, I'm not really sure what the matter is. I'm not really sure what is going on with her. Let's think about this. And what I found was our school district was very, and like all school districts, it wasn't specific to ours. What I found in my work for the ARC, as I met people and as I talked to people, this is a nationwide world problem. This is not very small to just my daughter, was that, people were quick to wanting to pretend like they had a handle on this and they knew exactly what to do. The people that are most successful, the people that are most educated, are the people that are willing to say, I'm not really sure, but let's try this. And that is what makes education great. So you need to be brave, and you need to be willing to say, I don't really know, but I'd like to find out. And again, the best practices for education apply to all children. All teachers must have a 4-year degree. General ed teachers will say, well, I'm not a special ed teacher. I don't know what to do. Well, that's the whole point. It's not that we want all the teachers to be special ed teachers. We need general ed teachers. I want teachers that have a general understanding of what Courtney should look like at 16 years old. What is a typical conversation for 16? What are typical behaviors? There is just as much need for that general ed teacher and their expertise on what looks typical as there is for a special education teacher that can help support creative ways to adapt lessons, to use technology, to support kids with special needs. All teachers must stay current with the educational research. We know that we do not ability group kids all throughout the day. That's bad for kids' self-esteem. And yet, in schools, we have made separate classrooms and labeled them, an AI room or a CI room. As a general education teacher, I know that if a child gets, for example, speech help, I can't tell anyone. I can't go to dinner and talk with my friends and say, oh, Johnny went to the speech teacher today, because that's private and I can't share his information. Yet they were wanting my daughter to go down to a classroom where she was labeled, autistic in front of everybody. Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that we meet the needs of safety and security and hunger and all of that feeling of belonging first before you can meet those higher level needs, curiosity and higher level learning. And having kids with disabilities and done well increases test scores of all the kids, because you're following the research-based practices. And again, honoring the confidentiality of all kids. Even as curriculum, I know as a teacher, there is no such thing as the entire class being at grade level. I've had kids, when I taught second grade, kids that could not read, pretended to read, and oh, guess what? They were in class and they really couldn't read. I had a student in the second grade. I was trying to get a handle on where he was, and as a reading teacher, I took him through some reading tests, and he could word call all the way into college. And he was funny, because he said, isn't this funny? I can say all these words, but I have no idea what they mean. And I thought, yeah, very funny. I'm teaching second grade. How am I supposed to address your needs? But that is normal in a classroom, to have a very diverse group. And as good teachers, we differentiate instruction to meet the needs of all kids. And what I found was, when I was teaching second grade, after I had my daughter, there weren't any extra paraprofessionals in the room. There wasn't a kid with significant disabilities that had access to technology that would have made that classroom more rich for everybody. What I found was, in the parent community, they didn't know that my daughter had several people signed in her IEP: speech teacher, occupational therapist, physical therapist, general ed teacher, special education teacher, all working on Courtney's plan. I think they kind of thought Courtney was just in the room with the teacher taking all her attention. I've had teachers tell me, they can't do this. My union won't let me spend all this time with your daughter. Like, yeah, they will let you do it. Those meetings might have to be within the school day, but we teach all kids, divorce, ADD, non-readers, poverty, medical needs. They are naturally multi-level diverse environments. Anything you want to know about best teaching practices, IEP goals, ideas for IEP goals, you can Google everything now. As a parent trying to help support my daughter in class, that's a whole other issue, the grading and the work. But what I have found is it's less confusing if we just do all the work with Courtney and have her go to work with that work done. And anything I want to know, how to use the graphing calculator as she goes along. I didn't have to learn everything in a day. We've learned it day by day, right along with Courtney. But you can go on the internet. You can find anything that you need to know there. The legal document driving all this, the Individualized Educational Plan, the passage of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, in 2004, and there's been updates since then.
Parents are of that team. Children with delayed skills or other disabilities are eligible for all their support free of charge, whatever they need. Education is a service. It's not a place. The IEP drives where the education takes place, and what I have found is the parents that mostly will say, I want my child included. And if we can support their dreams for their child and help them have a clear vision for what's possible, all kids can be included. The IEP is the legal document. It's monitored by the state. If whatever's written in that document is not being done, they're out of compliance. Everything that the child needs, if they need technology, if they need special seating, everything must be written in that plan. As I said, the label gives you access to service. So whatever level of service you
Need is
So what I have found is if our dreams for Courtney is to develop language, to make sure that the IEP has solid social goals in it, that we don't want her to receive a separate education, that her best chance at hearing questions and having access to life, is to have it written in the IEP in a way that she'll be in that classroom. So there's Courtney in her choir robe. No, she can't sing that I know yet, but she's on stage and she is, we see her keeping time to the music. She loves it. And that was my first place I saw evidence of her memory, was on stage when it was her turn to sing the next song. I knew it from the way she straightened up before every song. And it was exciting to see, and she loves being on stage. I love the experience for her, and just like,
all kids be allowed to experience what it feels like to be on stage, and to practice those songs every day in choir class, to be surrounded by music. She's on the team and the track team to get her walking and to exercise her heart. She did not learn to stand up and walk in the separate school. She learned to stand up after years of therapy. We said, you know what, we want her back in her school. We want to do this the best she can. It was actually in the library. I was a parent helper that day, and I had gone in to help. And the librarian read a beautiful story to all the children in kindergarten, and Courtney was on the floor, like all the kids, seated. I didn't know enough to request special seating. I was just so glad she was in the kindergarten class, and I was so glad to be a helper, and I was so glad to hear the kids whispering around her and that she was having this great experience. I kind of missed it when the teacher said, she leaned over and said, "Okay, children, now stand up and go get your books." And with that, the 20 learners, including Courtney, stood up for the first time right in front of me. And I did what any professional mother would do. I instantly started to cry. All those years of therapy and without a purpose for wanting to stand up, I can't, what I'm asking her to do is very difficult. And I need to give and support of typical peers to have that desire. She learned to take her first steps, not with me. I mean, I'm pretty sure to a 45-year-old speech teacher either, even though I'd like that. She seems to want to be amongst people her own age, which is typical. In first grade, all those kids in Girl Scouts were meeting
in one of the sand table, and I thought I was pretty smart. I had Courtney propped up there in her braces on her legs, and all the kids walked from one sand table to the other sand table, left Courtney there all by herself, and I was devastated. And, Courtney did take her first step. She followed them over to the other sand table. And not because I prompted her, not because it was in therapy, but because she wanted to go over with the other kids, and she had a great desire to do that. So I see to apply things that are very difficult for her because she's in a natural setting. The evaluations that people enter into do not determine the placement. There is not a rule on who's included and who's not. It's determined through that IEP process, which is supposed to be very individualized for each child. So every year they would say to us, Mr. and Mrs. Greening, go look at the AI room. Go look. Okay, so you have to kind of look, otherwise you seem unreasonable. And so I would go and look, and I would say, you know, I'm not here to critique the whole AI program or placements. What I'm here to do is say, my daughter needs language, and there was no one talking in that classroom. My daughter needs peer interactions. My daughter needs to develop eye contact. There's no one in this room she can meet eye contact with her. So, you know, that separate placement didn't work for my daughter. And if you keep it very small, you don't have to save the whole world. You can save one child at a time and do what's best for them. The parents request inclusion. It's not the test scores. So, for example, someone say the next bullet point, you know, Courtney doesn't talk. That's proof she doesn't belong in a regular classroom. And however, if you do the inclusive interpretation, Courtney doesn't talk, that's proof that she needs a rich language of talking, and she needs the choir. And, you know, Courtney can't walk very well yet, and we need to increase her stamina. That's proof she needs to be on the cross-country team and the track team with support. So those limited skills mean we need a greater environment for her to be supported in, with kids that are competent, that can support her her work and everything she's doing, and that she can support them, you know, to let kids know that, you know, there's a big range of what's typical, and that she decreases competition and the acceptance and love. And, you know, in addition to all her supports and services that come into classrooms daily. You know, there must be someone more qualified to help the child. You know, as you talk to people, a lot of people don't know there's separate schools still for kids with cognitive impairments and autism. And they're still being told to, if they're good parents, they'll send them somewhere else. And again, you know, there is one state curriculum for all kids, and the best reading practices and writing practices apply to all kids. And so, you know, I had trouble understanding that, and I would ask the researchers that would come in, and I asked Richard Allington when he came to speak to our district. He's a reading researcher, and I asked him about teaching. And I said, you know, everyone's focused on her behaviors, and I want her to learn to read. And he said, well, at least you got her fully included. You know, like, even the people do the research understand that you have to have models, you know, of reading. And he asked me, he said, so, like, when you read to, and I said, well, of course. And he said, well, when you get to a word that you don't know, are you explaining to her how you sounded it out and how you figured it out? And I said, well, of course. You know, all the things I wanted her to do were being done in the best practice in our school districts, where they've adopted standards of education. They apply to all kids. So the difference is, in a regular situation, all of Courtney's being addressed. And this this slide, you know, that's 100%. She's a daughter, a citizen, the movies. She loves movies, fashion, you know. She's a granddaughter, a sibling, a neighbor. All of that happens in our neighborhood school. And if I could lay just the 2% on top of that, yeah, and she happens to have a disability. But in the separate school, her whole life was about the disability, and I didn't have connections to our neighbors and people that knew us. And it was a very unnatural way to experience school. Okay, so, you know, even in places like the cross-country team, the community, you know, she blends in. You know, she's outside. She's
she's learning to be independent, and the jogger stroller often gets left behind. So, basically, whatever your hopes and dreams are for these children, what I learned is that you can have a very typical life. Universal design for education is a way to give kids access to learning. In the training I've gone to, what they say is, you need a good curriculum, you need good content, you need good teachers, and then you just need the technology to kind of give them access to it. So, when you hear these children as adults say, I could read when I was little, I just couldn't demonstrate the behaviors that allowed people to believe it, to think how differently they'd be treated if you presumed competence. Courtney went on the 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C. along with her classmates. Michigan Adaptive Sports, we took Courtney skiing. The greatest thing about that,
Those are her brothers. More typical Courtney's life is, this was the best ski ever. She skied down the hill with one of their expert instructors, and then that ski jacked up so she could ride the chairlift. And if Courtney has a typical life, then our family goes to Washington, D.C. Our family goes skiing. Our family has in our community. So you're giving access to families that you're not feeling sad. You're not feeling that the child's sick. Courtney's not sick. She's healthy, but she happens to have disabilities. These children, their best chance of being kept safe, are amongst typical kids. I haven't met a child yet that doesn't belong in a regular classroom. I just haven't met them. Even kids, like she was in class with a kid that got sick all the time. Well, that kid got sick on Courtney because she couldn't get up and run away. I've seen kids in classrooms that have like brittle bone problems. Well, those kids among typical kids are kept safe because you can teach kids, don't bump into them, be careful. So, I just hope that we have a vision that all kids belong in school together to create a better community in life. So are there any more questions?
There are.
I
Okay.
have a question. What's the difference between mainstreaming and inclusion? Because that's a question on the homework.
Well, my understanding is, as a teacher, mainstreaming, in my experience, has been people that just kind of want the kids to come in as guests. So they want to come in and experience gym and music. Or like, for example, as the reading teacher, they say, oh, Mrs. Greening's in there. Let's come for 5 or 10 minutes while she's in there. But unfortunately, if you just try to mainstream kids, they're guests. And kids with disabilities often have trouble with transitions.
Come and go like that. And I really believe in inclusion. You're looking at the whole child and their whole life and it's a philosophy of you belonging. Is that a good response?
Yeah, I'm sorry. The question was, what is the difference between inclusion and mainstreaming?
I'm sorry. So that question was, what was the difference between inclusion and mainstreaming? So in my belief, I think if people should treat everyone as though they should be included, and we shouldn't be trying to just invite people as guests.
Another question coming from Ava is this. Is the standard curriculum in school?
The standard curriculum is the content, and universal design is just another way. It's in my book, but any way that you can give access to the education. And any lesson you do, if you try to give a creative way using technology, the iPad is fantastic for that. There's communication. They call them integrationists, that use technology and can do a technology evaluation to see what kids need best. It's best to kind of look at each individual child with an open mind and what technology or what do they need to have access to this curriculum and to to participate in the curriculum, not to prove what they know. There's no need to prove it. You need to be a part of it and to participate in it. And we need to stop trying to quiz kids before we
Let them go on. Assume that she knows it and continue on, because that's the best chance she has as a complete education and understanding.
We have time for one last question. We have time for one last question. Sally asked, what
is Courtney's dream? That's a great question.
Courtney's dream is to live a great life and to live a happy life. And right now, I am kind of the spokesperson for Courtney's dream, and it's based on what I see Courtney doing. And so it's my best guess. But I'm open to changing, Courtney's dream. The point is that I open every door for Courtney. And right now, they start transition planning at 16 years old, which is kind of funny to me because my boys, no way at 16 will they have any vision of what they want as adults. But with children with disabilities, here she had a slow start, and I have to figure out what she wants to be. I think my best guess is that she wants to do something with technology and with animation. And she has a gift for certain sounds and playing certain sounds. And I think that's her path and her vision. And I'm pretty sure that she's going to want to live without her mother as much as I would love to stay with her my whole life. But she needs to grow away from me. So her dream would be like any person's dream, is to live an independent life based on what she loves to do and the people she likes to be with. And so for now, until she finds a voice, I need to be the one to open those doors for her. So, and like I said, my book is easy to read. It's on purpose. It's a couple days of reading because I was trying to give research to people in a short period of time at meetings, and it was hard to clarify what they needed to know. So what I did is, if you need the information, you can go to my website. I think Mike's got a link to it. Yeah, a link to my book. And so, I just encourage you to be brave and to have an open mind and to, and to talk that have disabilities. My favorite people are the people that come up to Courtney and say hello to Courtney and talk to her. And even at cross-country meets, there was a man, I don't know where he came, coaches came up in this crowded place, and Courtney was in her wheelchair. He came right up to her and he said, "Well, hello, beautiful. I see you're competing today. Good luck to you." So don't be afraid, and sometimes people with disabilities can't talk back with their voice, but will talk back to you with their eyes and their body language, and to not be afraid to read them in a different way and to acknowledge their smile and their families. Yeah. You have your homework here. So it's your competency assignment for week 4. This is from Elizabeth Jenks. Do you want to go through that with them?
Yes, thank you. And Jennifer, I want to thank you for another very engaging and informative presentation. As always, you did such a great job. I would really recommend Jennifer's book, whether you're in school social work or not, because again, the main mission is inclusion in education, but inclusion in communities as well. This is your competency this week. Read the questions very carefully. We had some people last week that answered as professionals, but anyway, competency assignment for week 4, 200 words or less. What is inclusive education? How is inclusion different from mainstreaming? And give 2 evidence-based benefits of inclusive education. And Jennifer gave several benefits of inclusive classrooms. So use any 2 that you remember of her stories and examples in this assignment. Okay, and just read the questions carefully because we had some people misinterpret last week's questions. And just in wrapping up, I'd like to really reflect on something that Jennifer brought up about people learning as they actually do a task in real time and in real environments versus unnatural environments. And if you think back to week 1, we talked about the developmental model, and that was a big failure of that model, right? Because people were learning to unnatural environments. So her story beautifully illustrated when Courtney stood up the first time in kindergarten. It was in that natural environment for a 5-year-old with other children her age. and it happened naturally. And that's how people learn, and especially people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So that's my last thoughts for the day. Again, Jennifer, thank you very much. Appreciate everybody that tuned in today, and next week it's cultural competency.